Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles for a detailed and comprehensive analysis. The idea is to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. Now, before we start, I have a few important things to discuss and a couple of important announcements to make. Yesterday, UPSC conducted the prelims examination for 2025. Many of you might have seen the question papers as well. And we have been hearing from our students that many of them have performed really well in the examination and they're expecting scores above 100 or above 120 as well. But however, the paper was not as easy for others. Many students have felt it was moderately difficult, particularly the CSAT paper. Now, no matter what happens, those of you who have given the exam yesterday, if you are scoring, let's say 90 and above, now this is the time to get started with your mains preparation without wasting any time. Now, if you haven't checked your answers yet, please watch these 2 sessions that we conducted yesterday on our YouTube channel, where we provided a detailed analysis of the question paper with the answer keys and the expected cutoff. So, others might be scoring, let's say, much lower than 85 or something, or let's say those who have not done well in CSAT, don't get dejected. Instead, introspect, ask yourself where you went wrong. If you're scoring lower than what is expected, then it essentially means there was something lacking in your preparation. So instead of getting disappointed and dejected and demotivated, ask yourself this question as to what went wrong. Try to introspect, try to see where you could have improved, what could have been done better. And that learning is something you have to incorporate into the next attempt. Now, those of you who will get started with your mains preparation, the most important thing for you would be answer writing practice. So, to help those serious candidates who are preparing for the upcoming mains exam, Unacademy will be launching Conquer Mains 2025. Because for Conquer Prelims initiative that we carried out over 5 stages from January to May, we received a fantastic positive response. In fact, in yesterday's question paper, a number of questions were directly coming from Conquer Prelims across subjects. So, based on students' demand, we are planning to launch a focused program for mains with special attention being provided to answer writing. So, this limited course will begin from 31st of March and it will give you access to more than 50 live classes with 100 plus hours of teaching. We will cover the most important static concepts and as well as the current affairs. It will also give you access for our UCAN sessions, Unacademy's Current Affairs Navigator, where we cover subject specific current affairs on a monthly basis. And you can access all the UCAN sessions during the duration of this course, which will last from June to August. Essentially, it's a 3-month program, a well crafted program designed to meet the needs of serious mains aspirants. You will also get complete assistance from us in your answer writing in each and every class. After we cover the basic concepts, we will spend some time with you, give you some practice questions, and expect you to write live answers so we can discuss those answers then and there in each and every class. We will also give you a set of practice questions to which you will write answers and give it to us for feedback. And they will be evaluated not by mentors or some subject experts. They will be evaluated by your teachers. The educators themselves will look at your answer copies and give you detailed feedback within 48 hours. The whole idea is to ensure that we help those students to, to be fully prepared for the upcoming mains exam. Along with covering the syllabus, there should be adequate focus and attention on answer writing. So you can enroll for this program at just 5,999 and the link for the same will be provided in the video description below. But those of you who are preparing for 2026 and beyond, for you, there is a special offer by Unacademy to enroll for our online classes. You can avail a 12-month subscription at just 19,999 and you also stand to get up to 12-month free extension. This will give you access to our comprehensive course, which includes live and recorded lectures of all the subjects, study material, test series, mentorship, and doubt resolution sessions. Now, on the subscription page, you will see a different price. But if you have to avail this discounted offer, you have to enter the code IAS English. So, those interested can click on the link provided in the description box below. And if you want the PDF of this class, please join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. After the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF over there. Now, let's get started and look at this important editorial on page number 8. This article is related to internal security and as well as Indian economy under GS paper 3. It's also partly connected with polity as well. This editorial is focused on the northeast region of India. Because in recent days, there have been some big developments that are happening with regard to the northeast of India. Prime Minister Modi made a very big statement that India's northeast is no longer a frontier. Essentially, PM Modi was stating that the northeast region is no longer remote and unconnected from rest of the country. Rather, he said that the northeast of India is at the forefront of India's progress. He called the northeast as a front runner in India's march towards a Viksit Bharat. This powerful statement from the Prime Minister was made during the recently concluded Northeast Investors Summit. The government has been trying to tap the potential of Northeast India to bring private capital, private investments into the region to drive economic growth and opportunities. The government has been trying to focus on connectivity, better governance and administration, and also to stabilize the security situation in the Northeast. Apart from the internal challenges that are seen in Northeast India, there are some external challenges which are coming up as well from Bangladesh, from Myanmar, from across the Bay of Bengal. And India has an ambition to link Northeast India with Southeast Asia and beyond. In fact, even this was mentioned by Prime Minister Modi that to stabilize Northeast India and to provide a very lucrative future, prospective future for the region, it's essential to connect the Northeast region and its markets with Southeast Asian markets and East Asian markets. This is a key priority of India's Act East policy. So, in the context of these statements and some of the new projects that were launched recently, I think we have to look at the editorial, go beyond this article as well, and understand everything about Northeast India. Understand its unique geography, its demography. What are the challenges present in the Northeast region? What are the opportunities that are present? Based on this, UPSC can ask you a mains question. And in the process, we'll discuss some important facts, which could also fetch you a prelims question as well. Now, if you look at the Northeast region, generally the Northeast region is often referred to as the Seven Sisters. This is a reference to the 7 states in the region that includes Assam, Meghalaya, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, and Tripura. But this is slightly a narrower interpretation of the Northeast. If you widen the interpretation of the Northeast, generally even Sikkim is included under it, and it is seen as the 8th state of the Northeast region. Now, the Northeast region faces many disadvantages, mainly because of its geography. First of all, it doesn't have good connectivity with India. There is a narrow land corridor over here in West Bengal, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. That is the Siliguri corridor, also referred to as the chicken's neck of India, as it happens to be a vulnerable choke point. It is bound by Bangladesh on one side, Nepal on the other side, a very narrow stretch of land, hardly 30 to 60 kilometers wide, which is the only link that we have with the Northeast region. And also beyond the Siliguri, if you cross this region, you enter Darjeeling and then the Brahmaputra Valley. The geography and the topography here is very complicated. You encounter hilly mountainous region, densely forested areas, along with fast-flowing rivers. There are some deep valleys present as well. So it's not easy to create infrastructure in such a region. Plus, the region is bound by so many international borders, as you can see in this map. Apart from Bangladesh, The region shares boundaries with Bhutan, with China, with Myanmar, and the whole region is landlocked. It doesn't have direct access to the sea. So this reminds us of a recent controversial statement that was made by the chief advisor to the interim government in Bangladesh, Muhammad Yunus, where he pointed out the weakness of the Northeast, calling it a landlocked region. And he projected Bangladesh as the sole guardian of the ocean. Basically meant Bangladesh is the only guardian of Bay of Bengal. And he made this controversial statement in China. And he urged China to play a role in India's Northeast using Bangladeshi ports. This controversial statement was not well received by India. India even retaliated against these moves. We have suspended transshipment facilities to Bangladesh. We have closed land border routes for trade. And there are reports that Bangladesh is inviting China to develop a strategic air base located over here, which is very, very close to India's Siliguri corridor. China already has a very influential presence all across this region. In fact, for many decades, China has been meddling and interfering in the northeast region of India. Since 1960s, China is known to sponsor some of the insurgencies, especially through Myanmar. Chinese intelligence, Ministry of State Security, MSS, is very active in this region, and through Myanmar, China has been backing several anti-India terrorist and insurgent groups. So there are significant challenges present over here from a security point of view, from an administrative point of view. Now, apart from this complex geography of the region also has a very rich, diverse, and complex demography. Northeast region is primarily a multi-ethnic region. There are several indigenous ethnic tribes that inhabit the northeastern states. They all have a distinct identity, a cultural identity. They speak a distinct language. They have unique, rich customs which are specific to each clan and each tribe. So, this often results in intertribal clashes as well, as it leads to a fight over land, resources, and as well as identity. This also leads to resentment amongst indigenous tribal groups against the state, against the government, regarding the lack of development and the lack of administrative concern. Plus, the presence of international borders and hostile neighbors makes it easier for those who have resentment against the Indian state to take up the path of extremism and resort to insurgency and terrorism against India. Because there is a free flow of weapons and drugs and money in this region as well. Myanmar is part of the Golden Triangle region, which is one of the biggest hubs in the world for drug production and drug trafficking. And wherever drug trafficking flourishes, all types of organized crime will also flourish, including arms trafficking, human trafficking. The region has also become a hub of cyber crimes from Myanmar to Thailand to Cambodia to Laos. The whole region has become a hub of gambling frauds, online frauds, and cyber crimes. There is a easy availability of drugs, weapons, and money. More importantly, extremists find safe havens to be available either in Myanmar or in Bangladesh as well, previously in erstwhile East Pakistan. And we have hostile countries in the region like China, Pakistan, sometimes hostile Bangladeshi governments, which have backed these insurgents and rebels against India. So there are some incredible challenges for India, but at the same time, if we utilize the unique geography of the Northeast, if we come out with right policies, right initiatives, we can turn the challenges into opportunities and bring about better development to Northeast India. Now, that has been the focus of the Indian government for the last 20 to 30 years at least. A separate ministry was created to look after the affairs of Northeast region. Special allocation is made in every government scheme and government program to support these border states and those states with a very difficult, complex geography. So, with regard to development, considerable progress has been seen in the past 2 decades at least. Insurgency has largely been contained. I mean, compared to 1960s, 1970s, or 1980s, that was the peak period of Northeast insurgency. In almost each and every state, except for Arunachal Pradesh, there were native insurgencies that were raging. For example, the Naga insurgency by NSCN in Assam, insurgencies led by Ulfa, or Bodo insurgency by Bodo outfits like NDFB. Then other groups like Kamtapur Liberation Organization. In Mizoram, the MNF, Mizo National Front, used to lead a massive insurgent movement back in the 60s and 70s. Tripura was a big victim of insurgency as well, led by Tripuri extremist organizations. Manipur, which is still burning today because of the ethnic divisions between the Kukis and Metis, it has a brutal history of conflict, not just intertribal, interethnic conflict, but a brutal history of insurgency against the Indian state as well. So, except for Arunachal Pradesh, in this region, that is in the seven sister states, leaving Sikkim as well, of course, every other state has seen brutal insurgencies, even Meghalaya, and some insurgencies are still active. But today, the threat is largely subdued. We have largely contained the threat as India has done very well in dealing with these security challenges. We have improved our border security both with Myanmar and Bangladesh. Our intelligence gathering networks have been more efficient. For many decades, India had imposed the ASPA, the controversial Armed Forces Special Powers Act, to give special powers to the security forces, that is, Indian Army and Assam Rifles, which are deployed in a counterinsurgency role. Even today, ASPA remains in place in some parts of Northeast India, and it has, in a way, helped the security forces to tackle the threat. So, India has done pretty well when it comes to tackling insurgency. We have even subdued some of the groups, weakened them, and pushed them towards talks. India has always been in favor of peace talks with insurgent outfits, and we have managed to work out several peace accords over the last few decades, especially in last few years. So India successfully ended the insurgency in Tripura by 1990s itself through better development, targeted security operations, and by ensuring that local support is in favor of the government. We managed to turn the tide in Tripura. The Mizo insurgency also ended in 1980s with the Mizo Peace Accord. So both Mizoram and Tripura represent success stories for India in its fight against insurgency. Recently, the Modi government in particular has made big strides. The Bodo insurgency was brought to a complete end with the signing of the Bodo Peace Accord in 2020. In 2015, India's longest lasting insurgency, the Naga insurgency. The Naga insurgency was put on the path of a peace process by signing the framework agreement on a Naga peace accord with NSCN IM faction, the Isaac Muiwa faction of the NSCN, which has been the primary Naga insurgent outfit. So these have been some big achievements with regard to tackling insurgency, subduing the threat, securing our borders, checking infiltration of organized criminals and terrorists, and working out peace accords with these groups. We even settled the Bru refugee crisis, which had badly affected the region. Mizoram, Tripura, both were impacted by the Bru refugee crisis, which was settled recently in 2020. Then, apart from that, states have their own boundary issues as well with each other. There are few interstate border disputes. For example, Assam has a dispute with Arunachal Pradesh. Meghalaya has a dispute with Assam. So there are these interstate boundary disputes, and they're also being contained and well managed to ensure that there is stability in the region. More importantly, the government has really stepped up development in the Northeast. The last 2 decades in particular has seen large investments by the government, led by the government. Recently, the Sela Tunnel, a strategic tunnel near Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh, has been built and inaugurated. This will be a big boost for transport and connectivity in a remote area, and it also serves a strategic purpose for Indian forces to quickly deploy towards the Chinese border if necessary. It can boost tourism and economic activities. The Bhupen Hazarika Bridge in Assam is another landmark infrastructure project. So, similarly, there are several key roads which are being built, railway network is being expanded, airport infrastructure is being promoted with several new airports planned, existing airports being expanded with regular flights connecting with rest of the country, and even inland navigation is being promoted over the national waterways that we have set up on the Brahmaputra River, the mighty Brahmaputra, which is the lifeline of the Northeast, and as well as the Bharat. So, when it comes to transport and connectivity, India has been taking the right steps. In fact, it's not just physical connectivity in the form of roads, rail, etc. Even digital connectivity has become a priority. Mobile and internet access has significantly improved in the Northeast, and even energy supplies have improved as the government is establishing a national gas grid connecting the Northeast region with the rest of the country. So there are a lot of opportunities that will open up because of this. The government is moving to set up key institutions as well in the Northeast, to set up important medical education centers, engineering colleges on the lines of NITs, medical institutions on the lines of AIMS, sports universities are being set up in the Northeast to tap the potential of the youth, to create new opportunities for the youth in the Northeast so we can pull them away from the influence of drugs and insurgents. So, this has been a significant development for India the last 20 years. The Manmohan Singh government and now the Modi government, they've built upon the initiatives that were launched. In fact, today the Modi government has even revoked AFSPA in several areas of the Northeast, and it remains in application in very few pockets of Northeast India. So there has been tremendous progress that India has made in recent times. So the upcoming projects which are proposed, we are looking at a new road highway which will help us bypass our dependency on Bangladesh. Because until recently, when we had a friendly government in Bangladesh under Sheikh Hasina, under the Awami League, India had planned several alternate connectivity routes. To reduce our dependency on Siliguri, we were connecting our road and rail network and inland navigation routes with Bangladesh to access Northeast from different points. Similarly, we had other projects planned with Southeast Asian countries like Myanmar under the Look East Act East policy of India, the Kaladan Transport Project, the IMT Highway, India Myanmar Thailand Trilateral Highway. So these were critical projects which are part of the Look East Act East policy of India to establish better connectivity and create alternate routes to Northeast India through Myanmar. So we had similar projects via Bangladesh to set up alternate access to Northeast region. Now these routes are increasingly becoming unviable because on one side Bangladesh has been turning hostile ever since Sheikh Hasina's government was thrown out following last year's rebellion and the interim government was installed. The current political setup in Bangladesh has largely been anti-India. It has been pro-China, pro-Pakistan, and there are considerable threats, strategic threats, which are coming up for India from Bangladesh. It's not just the minorities who are being targeted. Minority Hindus and other minority communities are being targeted by radical extremists. Apart from that, there are serious security strategic challenges which are coming up. So India would like to reduce its dependency on Bangladesh, create its own independent routes to connect with Northeast India, and maybe rely on the Act East policy and rely on Myanmar. But the challenge in Myanmar is the country is going through a brutal civil war. Ever since Myanmar's military, the Tatmadaw, imposed a crushing emergency, declaring the rule of the junta or the rule of the military junta. So in our neighborhood, there are two major problems present on the external frontiers of the Northeast region. So this is where the challenge lies for India. How do we overcome these external challenges? Because internally we have done pretty well. Economic activities have started picking up. Recently, TCS, right, the Tata Group, has announced massive investments in the Northeast to set up even a semiconductor fabrication facility in Assam. We are working with Bhutan on a smart project, the Gelugfu City Mindfulness City Smart Project, which will open up numerous opportunities for the youth in the Northeast. So, in terms of economic development, progress, infrastructure creation, India has been doing pretty well. We have stepped up investments in power sector as well, with new hydro projects in Arunachal Pradesh to tap the hydropower potential of the Himalayan region. Because see, don't forget the region is very delicate, very sensitive. It's very vulnerable to disasters. Ecologically, the region is very sensitive. It lies in a high hazard zone. It's classified under seismic zone 4. as far as the earthquake vulnerability is concerned, right? It's a high risk region. It's very prone to landslides, even devastating floods, especially from the Brahmaputra during monsoon, and even forest fires during the heat wave season. The northeast region is very vulnerable that way ecologically. It's very prone to disasters as well. So it's very important to not just provide for internal development, internal connectivity and investments. It's important to address the external problem as well. That's why India is focused on linking Northeast India with Southeast Asia and East Asia. This is very evident from the approach of the Modi government as well. Under the Act East policy, we have been driving countries like Japan, Singapore, and others to invest in the Northeast region. In fact, Japan has already provided concessional loans for developmental projects and infrastructure projects in the Northeast. We can link Northeastern markets with Southeast Asia, but this will entirely depend on our Eastern neighborhood. Because without Myanmar, we can't link with Southeast and East Asia. Myanmar is the gateway. It's like a land bridge that is connecting India directly with Southeast Asia region. So without stability in Myanmar, these projects of India, the whole vision of India will be hampered. Then Bangladesh as well is very critical. Bangladesh as an eastern neighbor, it plays a very critical role in the stability of the Northeast. See, Muhammad Yunus was not wrong when he said that Northeast region has a dependency on Bangladesh. The problem was where he made the statement, the way in which he made the statement. But factually speaking, Muhammad Yunus was right. We need to depend on Bangladesh. Without access to Bangladeshi ports like Chittagong and Mongla, it would be difficult to further develop the Northeast region. That's what India had planned all these years until Sheikh Hasina was in power. Now everything has turned upside down. This also highlights one of the key flaws in our foreign policy, where we invest all our eggs in one basket. Especially in our neighborhood, we end up depending on one political party, one leader to remain in power to ensure a pro-India approach. The moment the opposition comes to power, we lose all the influence and leverage. We have seen that happening in Sri Lanka. We have seen that happening in Maldives, in Nepal as well. So this is a correction that India needs to make. We need to learn to work with our neighbors, irrespective of who comes to power. Doesn't matter whether you like their ideology or not. Doesn't matter whether your interests align or not. You need to create influence and leverage and work with any government which comes to power. That is what any state, any major power would do. So we are facing these challenges in Bangladesh and Myanmar. Internally as well, of course, there are developmental problems, security problems which still persist. There are still few insurgencies which are still active. So it's important to bring those insurgencies to an end, work out peace processes and sign peace accords with these groups to stabilize the region and create economic opportunities. So that is what we learn from this important editorial. Of course, the editorial doesn't give you all these details, right? It does mention some of them, but I've just expanded this discussion so that it would be one comprehensive discussion on the Northeast. So any question based on this, I think you should be able to answer that. So please take up this mains practice question, use it for your answer writing practice. Now let's look at the next article related to India-Africa relations. Yesterday, the 25th of May, it was marked as Africa Day across Africa. Every year on 25th of May, African countries, they celebrate the day as Africa Day. Why? Because it was on this day in 1963 that the Organization of African Unity was established. The Organization of African Unity was one of the initial regional organizations representing the African continent. It promoted regional cooperation and economic cooperation amongst African nations and brought them together politically and diplomatically. The Organization of African Unity played a very big role in addressing some of the regional problems of Africa. So as a tribute to its establishment on this day, African countries mark the day as Africa Day. The Organization of African Unity, it doesn't exist anymore. It has now been replaced by a newer organization known as the African Union, which is the current regional grouping of Africa that was established in the year 2002. And it's one of the largest groupings in the world as it consists of 55 member countries. 55 African nations are part of it, making it one of the largest groupings in the world. And India has very strong engagement with the African Union. I'm sure all of you know that Africa has been a priority for India. Post independence, India played a big role in several African nations, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa, to help in their decolonization. India was committed in its principle to stand against imperialism and colonialism and helped many African countries in their independence struggle. India has played a pivotal role, especially in recent decades, to assist African nations in their development. As you all know, Africa is one of the most underdeveloped, backward regions, especially the Sahara Sub Saharan belt, even several parts of Central and Eastern Africa and Western Africa. They have very poor developmental standards. They lack basic necessities from education to healthcare to food security and nutrition. Several African nations are devastated by wars and conflicts and repeated military coups. In several African countries, terrorism is a very significant threat. So Africa is struggling to come out of this box in which it has been stuck for not decades but centuries. It has been exploited ruthlessly by foreign powers, driven by their own selfish interests. Initially, it was the European colonial powers from Britain to France to Portugal, Spain, the Dutch, even the Germans, the Italians as well. Every single European colonial power exploited Africa mainly for the resources, right from mineral resources to energy resources, including uranium, precious minerals, precious metals, gold, diamond, whatnot, including the Africans themselves who were abused through slavery under the colonial system. Later, it has been the United States, even Soviet Union and Russia, then China, even Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, all these major powers, they have been exploiting Africa for their own self-interest, their own narrow agendas. So today there is intense geopolitical competition in Africa, primarily between US and China, along with few other powers, including Russia and other major global and middle powers. Now, India is competing for its own space, its own influence. See, we naturally enjoy a lot of soft power in Africa because of the civilizational connection that we have, the age old cultural, economic ties that we have with Africa, especially East and Southern Africa. India has a natural advantage, a natural soft power, and most African countries are home to a large Indian diaspora as well. So we have a very decent trade relationship. In fact, trade volume has consistently been close to $100 billion, sometimes even above. And India has been making some big investments in Africa. But the focus of this article is how India can help Africa in its digital transformation strategy. How the digital domain can become a new area of cooperation between India and Africa that will drive India's African diplomacy. See, African Union has adopted the decade of 2020 to 2030, this whole decade, as the decade for digital transformation in Africa. It has adopted the digital transformation strategy to incorporate digital technologies in governance, in administration, in service delivery, in the economy, to basically scale the African economy, to create jobs, to provide better education, better healthcare, and ensure that African nations come out of the backwardness. Now, this is where India can play a pivotal role. In fact, India has already been playing a big role in Africa's digital transformation. Few years ago, when Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam was the president of India, he was on a visit to Africa. It's a very interesting story. Please pay attention to this and listen to me carefully. So, in early 2000, when APJ Abdul Kalam was the president of India, he went on a historic visit as the head of state of the Indian Republic. He was on an official diplomatic visit to several African nations. So, being the visionary leader he was, being the empathetic leader that he saw the suffering in Africa, the backwardness, the lack of education, the lack of healthcare. He saw how African people were suffering. And he proposed an idea that India can help Africa solve some of these problems through technology. He proposed that ISRO can make use of its satellites. India can invest in the digital infrastructure of Africa and provide for telemedicine and tele-education. So this vision of Abdul Kalam became the seed, the idea based on which Ministry of External Affairs crafted one of India's most successful soft power initiative, which is known as the Pan-African E-Network Project. It was one of the flagship foreign policy initiatives of the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. So India implemented the Pan-African E-Network Project. It was executed by TCIL, Telecommunications India Limited, which is a public sector organization in the telecom sector. It essentially connected ISRO's satellites, communication satellites. They were linked with ground stations that were set up by India across Africa, which in turn would be connected with a OFC network, optical fiber cable network, linking schools and hospitals across African nations. So India would set up the satellite receiver terminals and set up the satellite data link and use OFC cables on the ground to link these receiving centers with schools and hospitals to establish satellite connectivity. Through this digital connectivity, African students were connected with Indian teachers, with Indian universities, schools, and colleges, delivering remote education even before remote education became popular. Right? Even before the era of online learning, India had already taken a big step, a big milestone, thanks to the vision of APJ Abdul Kalam and the initiative of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. India extended telemedicine as African patients. They often look for reliable, cheaper, affordable access to healthcare. India became the hub of medical tourism. Even today, scores of Africans come to India for basic treatment, surgeries, not just because of the cheaper cost, but also the superior quality of healthcare in India. So we connected the healthcare centers in Africa with Indian hospitals, with Indian doctors providing remote medical consultation and bringing African patients to India with joint coordination between India and African nations for further treatment. So this has been a very, very successful initiative for India. We have expanded Pan-African E-Network project in the second phase as well. Several African nations are benefiting from this. So this is a mutually beneficial partnership. African countries gain access to better education and healthcare, and India gains influence. India gains soft power, the goodwill, the trust is generated. Now, this example shows you that India is not a predatory power, unlike China or US. The US, of course, has a major influence in Africa. Even European powers, they have major influence in Africa. But their interests are primarily driven by their self-interest to capitalize on the resources in Africa. Same with Russia as well. Right? Russia is also eyeing the mineral wealth of Africa. And China is one step ahead. It's not only eyeing the wealth and resources of Africa, it's trying to dominate Africa and establish a surveillance network. It's looking at Africa from a military perspective, setting up strategic ports, military bases, expanding its intelligence and military operations. China already plays a big role in Africa's mobile and internet infrastructure, but primarily the objective has been surveillance driven to ensure Chinese intelligence will have access to Africa's digital networks so they can spy on African nations and protect Chinese interests. But India is not predatory like China, like US or Europeans. So that is where India stands out. And the writer says India has a great opportunity to help Africa to transform digitally, provide better governance, better service delivery. In fact, we have already started taking some steps in this regard. Recently, India has signed a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with Togo, with the African nation of Togo, to help in their national ID project. Just like India has Aadhaar, other countries are also looking to create a unique identification system for governance and service delivery. And India will be assisting Togo in its national ID project. See, this is where you need to understand India has emerged as a global leader in DPI. What is DPI? Digital Public Infrastructure. Through the JAM Trinity, Jandan, which is the Financial Inclusion Initiative, where bank accounts were opened, Aadhaar, the unique identification number, and linking them with mobile phone of each individual. The Jam Trinity and the seamless digital payment ecosystem that India created through UPI, Unified Payment Interface. This has transformed the economic and administrative landscape in India. If you have seen yesterday's prelims paper, there was a question on India's UPI and how India is establishing UPI, expanding UPI to other countries. I've discussed this many times that we have scaled UPI and connected this with UAE, France, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and we have further global ambitions to expand the UPI network and make it a global product. Similarly, we are pushing our expertise in DPI, in digital public infrastructure. Because, see, the kind of digital tools that we are pushing and helping other countries to adopt, it is open source. It's not proprietary based like Western digital infrastructure. We are not interested to make profits out of this, right? And unlike China, which has the scare of a security backdoor, Chinese products, be it China's telecom hardware or software, right? Any internet based infrastructure from China is always suspicious because there could be a security backdoor created by these Chinese giants like Huawei, ZTE, to allow Chinese intelligence to hack into those networks. So the African nations have a worry that they can't depend on Western digital products, on Chinese digital products. That's where India can come in. With our open source model, with our transparent model, we can easily scale and implement DPI and provide our UPI as well to interconnect with African networks. So countries like Zambia, they are also seeking India's help and assistance to establish a digital governance ecosystem to provide e-governance in their country. Then more importantly, Namibia and Ghana both have significant Indian diaspora and they are interlinking their digital payments with UPI. Ghana, especially, is looking to borrow India's UPI model and implement the exact same model. And Namibia is linking its cross border payment system with UPI of India. So, very soon, India's UPI would be widely available in few African nations as well. That is the potential that exists for India to transform the digital landscape in Africa and create a mutually beneficial equation. So, based on this, please take up a practice question, try to write your answers and post them in the comment section. Now, let's look at this important article on page 10 related to Indian polity. It's related to a fundamental right, that is freedom of speech and expression, which is guaranteed under Article 19. See, recently there was a controversial incident during Operation Sindoor when India was retaliating against Pakistan for Pahalgam attack and it turned into a military escalation. Several people were expressing their views and opinions on social media. And as it happens, one professor from Ashoka University was alleged to have posted something which is seen as anti national, which is seen as a threat to India's communal harmony and India's national security and sovereignty. Several cases were filed against this professor from Ashoka University. Very serious charges were brought up against him. He was arrested as well. And now the Supreme Court has granted bail. But however, the investigations continue. In fact, Haryana and other state police, where the cases were filed, they have set up special teams as well to investigate the case. So this matter has acquired a serious tone, and this is something which is having national implications. Now, the point is, why did a professor from a reputed university get arrested just because of a social media post? What really happened here? Let's understand this. Let's look at both the arguments. I know it's a sensitive, controversial topic, but as always, we will be neutral and unbiased and look at both the perspectives. Then we will apply the constitutional understanding of Article 19. What's the constitutional precedent that exists? To what extent your freedom of speech and expression is protected and what is not? See, the professor in question had posted on Facebook, that is a Meta, that during Operation Sindoor, he criticized Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism and he praised the Indian armed forces for the courage they showed during Operation Sindoor. He further went on to post expressing concern about civilian deaths in any country, which is what any human being would do. He condemned Pakistan, praised Indian armed forces, but he expressed concern about the deaths of civilians on both sides, both in India and Pakistan. Then, upon that, he also called for de escalation. He was not an advocate for a full out war. He wanted the tensions to tone down and he urged de escalation between the two countries. Then, looking at the press conferences which were being held by the Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Defense, you remember that two military officers, women military officers from Indian Air Force, Indian Army, were specifically chosen to address the press along with the Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri. We had Wing Commander Vyomika Singh from the Air Force, and we also had Lieutenant Qureshi from the Indian Army. Now, this was a powerful symbolic message that India was sending out. So the professor praised this move of using women officers to represent the nation, to be the voice of the nation, to build India's narrative. But however, he also expressed a concern that saying this is hoping that this is not hypocritical. Because essentially he was indicating in a subtle manner, he was referring to how gender minorities and religious minorities are often discriminated in the country. See, India had carefully chosen the two women military officers to represent India's narrative, right? Especially Lieutenant Qureshi would not just be a woman, but she would be from a minority community. The idea was to send out a strong message from India regarding India's communal harmony, communal unity, and as well as the strength of India's women. So the professor praised the approach of India, but he pointed out that hope this is not hypocrisy. Let's hope that in the future as well, the minorities, be it gender minorities like women or religious minorities, hope they are treated in the same manner in the country. That is what he expressed in these posts. So it was a series of posts he had put up. Immediately, those who got offended by this, those who saw this as a threat to India's sovereignty, India's national security, national integration, to India's law and order, some even said this is essentially an offense to women, right? He was alleged to have outraged the modesty of the women officers as well. So several criminal cases were filed under the stringent provisions of Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. So he has been charged with threatening India's sovereignty and territorial integrity, charged with threatening India's national integration and communal harmony, charged with inciting violence on communal lines, and also with few other cases that have been filed. Eventually, he has been arrested, and finally, Supreme Court intervened, granting bail. But however, Supreme Court has not struck down the charges. It has essentially allowed for the investigations to continue just because of these social media posts. Now, what does the Constitution tell us? Article 19 gives you the right to free speech and expression. But is this absolute right? Definitely no. It's not an absolute fundamental right. There are restrictions. What we call as reasonable restrictions are placed on your right to free speech and expression, because free speech and expression obviously cannot be absolute in nature, right? There will be some reasonable restrictions, and the Constitution lists 8 specific reasonable restrictions on your right to free speech and expression. So, what are these reasonable restrictions where the fundamental right can essentially be withheld by the state? If your free speech expression threatens the sovereignty, integrity of the nation, if your free speech and expression is threatening the security of the state or friendly relations with a foreign country, or if it is inciting violence, threatening public order, that is law and order, or if it is against decency and morality, if you're making immoral statements, indecent statements, and if it is harming someone's dignity, reputation in the process with a criminal intent to defame someone, or if you're in contempt of court, or if you're inciting a criminal offense through your speech and expression. These are the 8 specific grounds on which Article 19 may not apply. Now, the question is, those who have criticized this professor, who have called for his arrest and punishment, they argue that whatever he posted on social media was a threat to the nation, a threat to religious harmony, a threat to women, and that is how they justify the violation of Article 19. They say it's a justified violation because it falls well within the ambit of reasonable restrictions. Now, the question is, at what point do these reasonable restrictions kick in? Now, just because someone felt offended by what others said, just because someone felt that it was an insult to them, can this fundamental right, which is critical in a democracy, be just withdrawn? Can you allege that someone is not patriotic enough, right? And say that their right to free speech and expression should be curbed? Can you criminalize free speech on the grounds that someone allegedly is not patriotic enough to stand with the country or the government? So that is the whole point of discussion here. Now, when it comes to Article 19, there have been several Supreme Court rulings in the past. The Supreme Court has been very, very clear that the state cannot impose any restriction beyond these 8 constitutionally prescribed reasonable restrictions. In the landmark Shreya Singhal case of 2015, when the Supreme Court declared Section 66A of the IT Act as unconstitutional, because this section was a very vague and broad provision where offensive messages sent through communication networks could be criminalized. So, for every online post on Facebook, WhatsApp, people were getting arrested, innocent people. Just because someone filed a complaint saying it was offensive, they would get arrested and remain in jail, which was a gross miscarriage of justice and constitutional rights. So, in the Shreya Singhal judgment, the Supreme Court struck down this provision as unconstitutional, and it clearly observed that vague grounds cannot be cited as an excuse to take away free speech and expression. Just because someone says they felt insulted, just because someone felt that the speech was hate speech, just because someone felt annoyed or abused by someone's speech and expression, you can't take away Article 19. Even if it offends you, even if it shocks you, disturbs you, right? Even if it's against the government, against the prime minister, against the president, or against the judiciary, you have a right to speak. You have a right to express yourself. Apart from these 8 restrictions, right? Just because someone subjectively felt offended or abused or insulted, it can't be a ground to invoke these charges. You can't criminalize free speech on these grounds. In the Kaushal Kishore case, 2023, a constitution bench of the Supreme Court clearly pointed out that the grounds enumerated under Article 19, Clause 2 are exhaustive. Essentially, no other grounds can be invoked apart from these 8. Now, the point is, some of these reasonable restrictions are open to interpretation. Right? What exactly constitutes a threat to the sovereignty of the nation? What exactly constitutes defamation or violation of decency or morality? It is left to the subjective interpretation of the authorities eventually. So that is why it's important to strike that balance. Yes, obviously, in the name of free speech, you can't say anything you want, right? If you are deliberately inciting communal violence, threatening the security of the nation, right? Definitely, that is something which can't be tolerated. But what this professor posted, was it really anti-national? Was it really against women? Was it really against communal harmony? That is the big question. Of course, investigation will determine that, the courts will determine that. But the Hindu has presented the opinion of a former High Court judge who has looked at the matter, who he has seen the posts put up by this professor. And this judge, with his experience, is stating that there was nothing at all in what he had posted which can be seen as illegal, which can be seen as a criminal act. So this makes it very clear that it's important to ensure that the alleged lack of patriotism, the alleged deficiency, right, in standing with the government or the nation cannot be a ground to criminalize your free speech. Everybody has a right to express themselves. Free speech must prevail apart from those 8 restrictions. But problem is, those restrictions are not narrowly defined enough. Quite often it tends to get misused. Eventually, such cases will be struck down. But by then, the accused would have become the victim, serving months and years in jail, right? Which is a threat to their own dignity, to their essential fundamental rights. By the time the courts intervene, right, several months and years would have passed, permanently damaging their reputation, their image, and essentially their free rights. So that is the debate this article brings up, the jurisprudence surrounding free speech. So this is an important topic both for prelims and mains. Now let's look at the next article. There is a major tragedy, a disaster, which is brewing on the coastline of Kerala. A couple of days ago, A massive cargo ship, a Liberian flagged cargo ship, MSC Elsa 3, it basically ran aground a few nautical miles from the coastline of Kerala in the Arabian Sea. It not only ran aground, it started tilting and eventually it has completely sunk. Now, the concern here is this massive cargo ship was not an ordinary cargo ship, it was a large container ship carrying 640 containers on board, filled with goods and various commodities. Now, this shipping accident could become one of Kerala's biggest tragedy, rather India's biggest environmental tragedy. Why? Because the ship itself has been leaking oil and other hazardous material that it carries on board. Marine oil and gas, diesel is already leaking, and authorities have confirmed the leakage which has been reported. And not only that, there is a bigger serious concern. So it's not just the oil spill which has come up. Oil spill in itself is an environmental threat, which we'll discuss. But apart from the oil spill, there is a bigger concern which is bothering the Indian authorities and the Kerala authorities right now. Because out of the 640 containers, 13 of them are carrying highly hazardous cargo. Extremely hazardous cargo is being carried. 12 of the containers contain something known as calcium carbide. There are few containers carrying furnace oil and also massive quantities of diesel is present on board. See, all the crew are safe. The crew members were rescued by the Indian Navy along with the Indian Coast Guard. Indian Coast Guard and Indian Navy immediately ran rescue missions, search and rescue missions, and rescued all the crew and they are safe. But the ship which has ran aground and sunk, right? It is not only leaking oil and other deadly substances, there are hazardous containers which might now float and they might reach the shoreline of Kerala. So, a complete emergency alert has been declared all across the coastline of Kerala. A disaster management protocol has been initiated. Concerned authorities have been taking emergency steps to contain this crisis. Now, let's understand, why is oil spill such a big environmental concern? Why is it treated as a big disaster? See, oil spills will eventually wash up on the coastline. Tidal activity, waves will essentially transport the oil slicks towards the shoreline, and this can be extremely detrimental to the marine ecosystem. Coastal ecosystem, be it coral reefs, for marine organisms, the aquatic life, right? The entire marine coastal ecosystem will be under severe threat. And this will be a long term threat. It's not easy to clear up a oil spill, which can happen on such a large scale. Now, to contain the oil spill, we have a designated authority in India. The nodal authority to deal with oil spills is the Indian Coast Guard. Indian Coast Guard has the primary responsibility to work with other concerned agencies and institutions to tackle oil spills. It has the required resources as well. So, Indian Coast Guard has already deployed the Dornier, which is a maritime reconnaissance patrol aircraft, which was asked yesterday as well in prelims question by UPSC. A Dornier has been deployed to scan the extent of the damage. Satellites are being deployed to keep an eye on the spread of the oil spill. And dedicated ships also have been dispatched with the Coast Guard with the required men, material, and equipment to contain the oil spill. Now, how can you contain the oil spill? What methods are used? Something known as booms or boom barriers are installed. Now, let's say the oil spill has spread in this region. Immediately, a barrier is created around it using these floating booms, which are placed by a Coast Guard ship, so that the oil doesn't spread. Usually, oil will be floating on top, it doesn't sink immediately. That's why the oil gets transported towards the coastline. So, if you place a boom around it, a floating boom, it will contain the spill for some time. Then, the Coast Guard will deploy skimmers. Imagine like a vacuum machine which will suck out and skim the top layer of the oil. So that is one method which can be employed. Then apart from that, you can spray dispersants. There are chemical dispersants available. There are even bioremediation agents available. There is a type of oil eating bacteria which will break down the oil and basically sink the oil globules to the bottom of the sea floor, which is much safer. The chemical dispersant as well, it can be sprayed from the aircraft, from aircrafts like Dornier, or even through drones. You can spray it across this oil spill where it is contained inside a boom, and you can try to break up the oil particles, pushing them to the bottom of the sea floor, ensuring it doesn't wash up on the shoreline. So these containment strategies are already being implemented on a disaster mode, on an emergency mode by the Coast Guard in coordination with other authorities. Now, coming to the hazardous cargo which was being carried, this is absolutely dangerous. Authorities are tracking the possible movement of the containers as well, right? Depending on wave and tidal movement, these containers might wash up along the shoreline from Trivandrum all the way till Kannur. So it can come up anywhere along Kerala's coastline. As I told you, there are cargo ships, there are containers on this cargo ship which carries calcium carbide, which is extremely hazardous, and as well as diesel and furnace oil. Now, from a prelims point of view, you should know what is calcium carbide. Calcium carbide is basically produced by heating lime and coke. Essentially, in an electric furnace under extremely high temperature, calcium oxide and carbon are brought together to form calcium carbide. So, calcium carbide is essentially a colorless solid, but once it is fused in an electrical furnace, it becomes this grayish black lump, a lump like substance, or a mud or rock like substance, which has a grayish blackish color. It can even be powdered as well into crystalline form, but it has this garlic like odor, which is very distinct. Now, calcium carbide has a big industrial application. It's used across industries. It's used to synthesize various organic compounds in the chemical pharmaceutical industry. It is used in steel manufacturing and metal cutting as well. Because calcium carbide essentially is used to produce the acetylene gas, which is a key raw material in these industries. That's why calcium carbide is also known as calcium acetylide. Now, calcium carbide is extremely dangerous because it reacts violently with water. When you expose calcium carbide to water or moisture, it reacts in a violent manner, creating fire and heat to produce acetylene gas. And if humans come in contact with it, it can burn your skin, creating rashes and deep burn injuries. And if you inhale the gas, it can be very damaging to the eye. The eyes can burn, right? Your eyesight can be affected as well. And it can affect the respiratory tract, even leading to pulmonary edema. It can be fatal as well. That's why the authorities, the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority, has issued a complete warning all along the shoreline, asking people not to touch the container ships if they wash up. Because you know how people are, right? Particularly in India, they're very curious. And if something washes up, because don't forget, such a massive container ship with 640 containers will be carrying some precious goods and commodities, from electronic items to apparels, shoes, watches, whatnot. So people would like to get their hands on it despite knowing the risk. That's why authorities are being deployed along the shoreline to prevent people from, from touching the containers or from venturing out into the sea. Is that clear? So calcium carbide is highly reactive and flammable in nature, making it very, very hazardous. So this is going to be a big challenge, and if not managed well, it can turn into an environmental disaster. Now, coming to the last big article on the supplement page, the Hindu carries this interesting article about the length of India's coastline. The length of India's coastline. Now, since school days, you would have studied that India has a coastline of 7,516 kilometers, including all the coastal states from Gujarat to West Bengal on mainland India, and as well as the island territories of Andaman, Nicobar, and Lakshadweep. Our total coastline length has always been 7,516 kilometers. Now, what if I told you this number has changed drastically? Last year in December 2024, the Ministry of Home Affairs, it notified that the length of India's coastline has increased to 11,099 kilometers. Now, how can such a massive jump happen? from 7,500 to 11,099. Did India acquire some new territory? Or has India's coastline grown due to some geological formation or geological phenomena? The answer is neither. We have not acquired any territory towards the coastal areas, right? And the last coastal state to essentially become part of the Indian Union was Goa. Understood? So it's not because of acquisition of any new territory or changes in geology or opening up of fresh coastline. No, this is because of a change in the estimation methodology. The methodology through which you measure the length of your coastline. Because measuring coastline is not easy. There is a fundamental geometrical problem that arises, a mathematical problem that arises when you go to measure the shoreline of a country. Every country faces this problem. It's called the coastline paradox. It's called the coastline paradox. What is this coastline paradox? See, when you're measuring a certain length, now let's say there is a piece of land which has this kind of shape, almost like straight lines. Now, how do you measure this length? Very simple. You basically take the shortest distance between the 2 points, measure this length along the straight line, and you get the perfect length, perfect distance. Now, let's say this is curved. Let's say the shape is curved over here. So you will essentially take the curvature into account and accordingly you measure that distance. This is also fairly simple. But what do you do if the shape is something like this? How do you even measure this when such a rugged shape exists? Because this is how coastal areas are. It's not in a straight line. It's not just a simple curve, right? So there would be these formations along the coastline. How do you account for that? There will be estuaries, deltas, creeks, lagoons, the mouth of rivers joining the seas and the oceans. How exactly do you measure the length over there? You can't just simply put up points and measure the straight line distance. See, back in 1970s when India's coastline was measured, age-old estimation methods were used. That's why the length was just 7,516 kilometers, because we had used a resolution, a very low resolution of 1 is to 4.5 million. This is a very, very low resolution because the technology of that era, the methodology of that era was very outdated. We did not have access to satellite images, GIS data, or LIDAR information, or drones. None of them existed back then. Using traditional survey methods, the coastline of India was measured. That's why the number 7,516, which was a gross underestimation. We had used a low resolution of 1 is to 4.5 million, which means most of these features were ignored. The inward cuts which might be there, the outward projections which might be there, they were not even considered. Simple straight lines were used at a certain distance to measure the coastline. But now, the Survey of India, along with National Hydrographic Office, they have conducted the most modern estimation possible using the latest technology. Right now, we have access to such resources by using GIS information, geospatial information system generated through satellite data, by using high resolution satellite images, drone based surveillance images, by using LIDAR data, and even GPS. Survey of India and National Hydrological Office, along with Ministry of Home Affairs, they have carried out a re-estimation accounting for each and every curve and the overall topographical features by adopting a higher resolution of 1 is to 2.5 lakh, which is many, many times better than the older resolution that was used for the purposes of mapping. So as a result, the length has jumped significantly to 11,099 kilometers. This is the coastline paradox, which is a geometry problem, a mathematical problem. It basically means if I keep on increasing the resolution, right, there is no end to the length which will be measured eventually. It can be infinite. Now, let's say I go for 1 is to 1 resolution. As we keep on increasing the resolution, Essentially, the length measured would never end. It would almost become infinite mathematically. So the better resolution, there will be a further increase in the length. This is the coastline paradox that every country deals with. So what you have to do is use the latest technology, come out with the best estimate possible, the nearest estimate possible, and conduct a review every few years. So now MHA has said we will recalculate the coastline length every 10 years going forward, because this has implications. This will impact your maritime security policy. The Navy, Coast Guard need this data for their planning. It will determine the deployment of India's naval fleet. It will have economic consequences. It will have impact on fishing, on India's exclusive economic zone, on India's rights in the EEZ. That is why we have to constantly update and remeasure the coastline. And also, there could be possibilities where tidal changes might expose new coastline or submerge some coastline as well due to rising sea levels. That has to be accounted for. That's why regular estimation is necessary. And now India will be doing it every 10 years. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a look at few small articles and end the class for today. On page 13, Assam's chief minister has made a very important statement aimed at Bangladesh. I just told you about the controversial statement of Mohammad Yunus when we spoke about Northeast India. He pointed towards the Northeast region being landlocked. He pointed towards India's chicken's neck, and he labeled Siliguri corridor as a vulnerability for India. And he said Bangladesh is the only guardian of the sea. Right? So, and India has been responding to this. The government of India has already retaliated as well. So, Assam's chief minister, Himanta Biswa Sharma, has pointed out that if Bangladesh is referring to India's weakness at Siliguri corridor, if Bangladesh is highlighting India's choke point, then India can also highlight two strategic choke points of Bangladesh. Bangladesh also has two important choke points, vulnerable choke points. One is the North Bangladesh corridor. I'll show you where it is located and why it is a big vulnerability for Bangladesh. The second one is the Chittagong corridor. Please make a note, very important from IR and geography perspective, mapping perspective. Now, please look at the map. You're looking at the map of Bangladesh. Can you see the Rangpur division here? This is Siliguri corridor of India over here. So from West Bengal to Meghalaya over here, between West Bengal and Meghalaya of India, there is a narrow corridor of Bangladesh that projects into India towards Siliguri. So from this point, which is Dakhin Dinajpur in West Bengal, towards the Garo Hills in Meghalaya, it is a very short distance, as you can see here. Can you see the distance between these 2 points? It's a short, narrow distance. Essentially, Assam CM is referring to this corridor that if India were to, let's say, blockade this corridor, the entire Rangpur division of Bangladesh would be cut off from the country. If someone is threatening India over Siliguri, stating a blockade at Siliguri will cut off Northeast India. Similarly, a cutoff at North Bangladesh corridor. This is the North Bangladesh corridor, NBC, lying between the Dakhin Dinajpur location in West Bengal towards the Garo Hills of Meghalaya. If this corridor is blocked, Rangpur division will be cut off from Bangladesh. Then towards the south, there is one more corridor towards Chittagong. Can you see here? This narrow corridor of Bangladesh. This is South Tripura, this point. And this is Bay of Bengal. So between South Tripura and Bay of Bengal, there is a very, very narrow stretch, which is narrower than India-Siliguri corridor. Hardly around 40-50 kilometers in width. If this is cut off, the entire Chittagong division will be broken from Bangladesh. Because see, don't forget, Chittagong port is strategically, economically, the most important port for Bangladesh. It's the economic hub, the major port of Bangladesh. This could be cut off from its capital, Dhaka, if there were to be a blockade at the Chittagong corridor. This is called the Chittagong corridor. Please mark these locations, be familiar with the names and the markings. This can be very important. Next, India is launching a new weather forecasting system known as Bharat forecasting system. It has been indigenously developed by the Pune-based Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology to provide accurate, localized weather estimates. So essentially, it has a high resolution of 6 kilometers, which is one of the highest in the world, which means for every 6 kilometers, the localized weather can be predicted with greater accuracy by the weather forecasting agencies such as the IMD, India Meteorological Department. So this has been possible because of the establishment of a new supercomputer at the IITM campus in Pune, which is the Arka supercomputer. Now it can crunch more data from radars and weather stations, and it can run more sophisticated weather modeling systems and provide for very accurate localized forecasts with a resolution of up to 6 kilometers. Then in Meghalaya, a new species has been discovered. Yesterday, if you saw the prelims paper, there was a new species based question on the peacock tarantula, which we had discussed in our Hindu analysis last year. So in Meghalaya, researchers have found a new cave dwelling fish, which also has adapted to the streams that are present over ground. See, generally, any life form which has adapted to living underwater, especially in a cave like system or deep underground where there is no sunlight or low oxygen, such organisms will not thrive when they come to the surface. But there are few types of organisms which are able to survive in both places. Such organisms are known as troglophile. So what is a troglophile? A troglophile is a underwater or cave dwelling organism which is usually a resident of areas which are completely dark. There is no sunlight at all. There will be very low oxygen. This organism would have adapted to that condition. But if you bring it over, let's say over the ground, let's say to the stream or over the land, for example, it will still thrive and survive. It would have adapted to these conditions as well. Such an organism is called a troglophile. Understood? So, this new species of fish, which is a cave dwelling fish, which has been able to survive by adapting to overstream conditions and environment, this has been discovered for the first time and it has been named as Schistura denaiclava. Denaiclava in Latin means a thick stripe because if you can see in the image, right in the center, this particular cave dwelling fish has a thick stripe in the center. So that's why the name. So it has this unique adaptation which allows it to survive in low oxygen, dark conditions in a cave or underground. And it has even adapted to surviving over ground. So such a species or such an organism is called a troglophile. It's endemic to these cave systems in Meghalaya. Now coming to the last article for today, on the supplement page, the Hindu carries this image of a key Amazonian river, the Bobnaza River. The Bobnaza River is in Ecuador, in Sarayaku, which is a tribal area in the Amazonian forest. So this location is important because Latin American indigenous leaders have held a summit. I'm sure you know that in the Amazonian River and Amazonian forest, there are many indigenous tribal communities that are present, fighting for their rights, their resources, and their land and their identity. So across the Latin America region, the indigenous leaders have come together to hold the Latin American Indigenous Leaders Summit in Sarayaku, which is the home of an indigenous tribe in Ecuador. And they have adopted a resolution to not allow their land and resources to be exploited by governments, by private corporations. Is that clear? So representatives of indigenous communities from Brazil, from Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Mexico, Ecuador, all of them participated and they have adopted this resolution that court rulings will be enforced and governments and private corporations will not be allowed to exploit their land and resources for their greed. So this is something which is relevant for prelims. So please make a note of it. So this is it. On this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope all the topics are clear. And if you like the session, do let me know in the comments and press the like button. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.